Welcome everyone joining us today on Zoom or Facebook Live for this Chatham House webinar on Sudan's Juba Peace Agreement, ensuring implementation and prospects for increasing inclusivity. My name is Rosalind Marsden, and I'm an Associate Fellow attached to the Chatham House Africa Programme, and I will be chairing this virtual event. We're delighted to have a very distinguished panel today, including Mohammed Hassan Al-Taishi, a member of the Transitional Sovereign Council of the Republic of Sudan, Yasir Arman, Deputy Chairman of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North, led by Malik Agar, and a leading member of the Sudan Revolutionary Front, led by Al-Hadi Idris. We have Huda Shafiq, a civil society expert on women, peace and security, and Professor Juma Kunda Komi, the Prime Minister's peace advisor. Before we begin the discussion, I just wanted to mention a few housekeeping points. For those of you taking part on Zoom, all attendees will be muted during the initial presentation by our four speakers. Then during the question and answer session, which will follow the presentations, you'll be able to use the raise hand function, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen if you're selected, and you will then be unmuted and able to ask your question. You can also submit written questions through the Q&A box, although we would prefer you to use the raised hand function if possible. Unfortunately, we are unable to take questions from participants joining us through Facebook Live. This meeting is on the record, which means that you may use information from the meeting and it can be attributed to the speakers and also to participants asking questions. Filming and recording the event are not allowed without prior permission from Chatham House, but you are welcome to tweet the event using the hashtag #CHAfrica. So let me now briefly introduce our great panel of speakers. Our first speaker is Mohammed Hassan Al-Taishi, who is a civilian member of the Transitional Sovereign Council. He was the chief negotiator and spokesman of the Transitional Government negotiating delegation in the Juba Peace talks, and was one of the main architects of the agreement. In his earlier career, he was elected chair of the University of Khartoum Student Union in 2002, and later worked as a consultant for the Darfur Compensation Commission and the Darfur Reconstruction and Development Fund, which was established after the Abuja Peace Agreement. Our second speaker is Yasir Arman, who Deputy Chairman of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, led by Malik Agar, and he was the movement's chief negotiator in the Juba Peace talks. Yasir Arman is one of Sudan's best-known politicians. Before South Sudan's independence, he was a prominent member of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, working closely with Dr. John Garang for many years. He took part in the Naivasha negotiations that led to the 2005 Comprehensive Peace Agreement. He stood as the SPLM's presidential candidate against Omar al-Bashir until 2010, until forced to withdraw. And he was the SPLM North's chief negotiator in the Addis Ababa talks until the movement split in 2017. Our third speaker is Ms. Huda Shafiq, who is a former UN gender advisor and co-founder of the Jessa Center for Development, which is a Sudanese youth initiative that enables active young people to lead social and political change through mainstreaming the youth agenda in development. She has held posts in several national and international organizations, including the UN, focusing on gender, natural resource management and peace building. And she has acted as a conduit between women in civil society and policymakers, political parties and armed movements, advising on how to make peace processes more transparent, accountable and inclusive. Our fourth speaker is Professor Juma Kunda Komi, who is the peace advisor to the Prime Minister, Abdallah Hamdok. He is also an associate professor at the Center for Peace and Development Studies and the College of Humanities at the University of Bahri. Prior to that, he was an assistant professor at the University of Juba, and then spent several years in Germany at the University of Halle and the Max Planck Institute. And he's the author of a well-known book called Land, Governance, Conflict, and the Nuba of Sudan, which was published in 2011. Today, our speakers will be looking at the challenge of ensuring implementation of the Juba Peace Agreement, which was signed on the 3rd of October, and increasing inclusivity. This peace deal is seen by its architects as having the potential of creating transformational change and as a rare historical opportunity to bring peace and democratization together. But of course, whether this materializes depends on whether it's going to be fully implemented. The leaders of the armed movements and other groups who signed the peace agreement arrived in Khartoum to a huge popular reception in Freedom Square on the 15th of November. The Juba Peace Agreement has since been incorporated into the constitutional document. But 2 months after signature, implementation is already behind schedule, at least according to the timetable set out in the implementation matrices, which were signed with the agreement. Signing a peace agreement is only the starting point of any peace process, and the implementation phase is always the hardest part. Sudan has had a dismal record of implementing peace agreements in the past, particularly during the Bashir era, particularly in terms of delivering benefits to the population rather than distributing jobs and positions to the signatories. But there are reasons to hope that this time things will be very different. And we hope that our speakers will reflect on what they see as the priorities and concrete steps that need to be taken to ensure successful and inclusive implementation this time around. All sides have stressed that the political will exists to implement the agreement, but what are the prospects of sustained cooperation among the signatories and of creating a united front with other democratic political forces to support implementation, given the current fragmentation and polarization of political forces? For example, what is the best way of resolving the current controversy over the Transitional Partners Council? The Juba Peace Agreement provides for the creation of a large number of implementing mechanisms. When can we expect to see the Peace Commission and other implementing mechanisms starting to be set up? Will there be a credible monitoring mechanism? Given limited international financial assistance so far, the global recession, the global economic recession related to COVID, and Sudan's own serious economic crisis, what can be done to mobilize funding for peace implementation internally from national resources or from external donors? And what role can Sudan's international partners play in supporting implementation politically, financially, and with technical support? And where are the priority areas? And then on the question of increasing inclusivity, there is now a real opportunity to get women more involved in the political space and in implementing the peace agreement and creating social peace. What can be done to engage with and involve community leaders, including women and youth? And what is the plan to increase the sense of public ownership? Finally, the Juba Peace Agreement is clearly a major step in terms of as a step towards comprehensive peace in Sudan, but it is not yet fully comprehensive and won't be so until two significant armed movements led by Abdulaziz Al-Hilu and Abdul Wahid Nur are also part of the peace. What are the prospects of making progress here? These are some of the questions which we hope our panelists will address. And these and other questions may also come up in the question and answer session. So I will now invite our speakers to each give short presentations, not exceeding 10 minutes, so as to leave enough time to engage with questions from the audience. And may I now turn to our first speaker, Mohammed Hassan Al-Taishi. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, to giving me this great chance to give a presentation to the Chatham House Africa Program panel about the Sudan Peace Agreement and implementation phase. And of course, it is in my honors to give this presentation and having me this evening. If I may, I will make my presentation in 4 or 5 points. That's focusedly about the Sudan Peace Agreement, the Juba Agreement for Peace in Sudan is an amazing achievement for Sudan, and it represents a critical step forward toward the realization of the goals of the December Revolution and for the achievement of a genuinely inclusive and comprehensive transition for Sudan. Freedom, peace, justice. When the Sudanese people took to the streets in the December Revolution, they called it for these 3 things. As everyone here is aware, the Sudanese people have suffered from decades of conflict, oppression, and marginalization throughout all areas of Sudan. And freedom, peace, and justice have long eluded the people of Sudan, but the Juba Peace Agreement has brought Sudan sustainability closer to realization, all 3 goals for all people of Sudan. The revolution gave Sudan a unique opportunity to reform Sudan, and it laid the foundation of current peace and political transition process that together will bring an end to decades of conflict and transform Sudan into inclusive, democratic, and unified nation. With the signing of the Juba Peace Agreement on 3rd of October, the Sudan has come closer to achieve these important objectives. We must thus take advantage of this opportunity and do everything we can to make sure that the agreement is implemented and the peace is durable and inclusive, that the political transition succeed, and that Sudan can finally be united in peace. The Juba Peace Agreement draws its strength from its comprehensive scope and inclusive nature. Over the past 3 decades, dozens of peace agreements have failed to bring durable peace to Sudan because those past agreements either were not inclusive or representative of all of the Sudan, or failed to address the comprehensive nature of the conflict, or both. From the outset of the peace talks in Juba, all of the parties recognized it and agreed that the peace process will need to be comprehensive in scope and inclusive in its participation. As such, we engaged in negotiations and ultimately concluded an agreement on an incredibly wide range of issues to address both underlying causes and consequences of conflict in all areas of Sudan. Through the Juba Peace Agreement, we have sought to address both national issues and regional particularities. Negotiating and finalizing the peace agreement was thus a long and complex journey that required immense effort from all those involved, because the scope of agreements we have concluded is unprecedented. Through the multi-track negotiation process, we were able to achieve real durable and implementable solutions to the problems facing all Sudanese people, and that have driven conflict in Sudan for generations. In the north, in the east, in the center, in Darfur, and in the two areas. Further, the parties engage in extensive consultations with representatives of IDPs, women organizations, youth groups, native administrators, civil society, and other Sudanese stakeholders groups throughout the negotiating process to help ensure inclusivity. While peace agreements, by their very nature, are never fully inclusive of an entire society, the parties undertook great efforts to make it as inclusive as possible and to establish a foundation for continually expanding the inclusivity of Sudan's ongoing process and political transition. The peace agreement provides the critical foundation upon which Sudan can base its political transition and continue along the path to achieve the goals of freedom, peace, and justice that brought all of Sudan to the streets in the December Revolution. Bringing in the other parties to the peace process and continuing to promote inclusivity will be critical to the success of the peace agreement and Sudan's political transition. The peace talks in Juba have been for the notable because almost every armed movement, with the notable exception of the group led by Abdul Wahid, have participated and engaged in the process. Of course, the negotiations with SPLM North Al-Hilo are ongoing and have not yet resulted in agreement. While we have yet to make substantial progress in those negotiations since they began in October 2019, we remain committed to achieving a negotiated and peaceful resolution of the conflict in the two areas. And we are encouraged by how the Prime Minister's historic trip to Kauda, the authorization of cross-border delivery of humanitarian assistance in the absence of signed agreement, and recent informal workshop between the SPLM North and Transitional Government have all helped to move the parties towards the resumption of talks. The parties to the Juba Peace Agreement are committed to the prioritization of peace process that includes all actors and that is part of genuine, inclusive, and comprehensive transition that is representative of all Sudan. The Juba Peace Agreement provides a strong base for future agreement with the parties who are not signatory to the agreement, and we look forward to any opportunity to work with our comrades who are not party to the agreement to move toward peace together. It was together that the Sudanese people took to the street in the glorious December Revolution. It was together that people of Sudan formed a transitional national government to move the country toward peace and political transformation. It has been together that we have worked with our Sudanese brothers and sisters to negotiate and conclude the peace agreement. And it is together that the Sudanese people will put an end to decades of division and empower a collective, comprehensive, and inclusive transition. The Juba Peace Agreement, as well as the borders peace process and political transition, will only be as successful as implementation of the peace agreement. Concluding the Juba Peace Agreement was an incredible achievement on its own, but it cannot alone bring durable peace and reform to Sudan. Implementation is the critical next step necessary for sustaining durable peace and for Sudan's political transformation. There cannot be successful political transition without sustainable peace and security. And there cannot be a durable peace and security without comprehensive political transition. Sudan's ongoing peace and political transition process are thus intrinsically linked, and their outcomes are mutually reinforcing. Implementation will not, however, be easy. The Juba Peace Agreement covers a wide array of complex issues and calls for comprehensive structuring and reform for the state and state institutions, including comprehensive security sector reform, transitional justice on both the national and regional level, creation of suitable conditions for IDP and refugee returns, compensation and reparation for victims of gross human rights violation. As such, the implementation of Juba Agreement requires the establishment of several national and regional implementation mechanisms and to follow of mass amount of funds and extensive technical and expert assistance. The challenges of implementation are additionally exacerbated by the state of Sudan's struggling economy and the global COVID-19 pandemic. Inflation is an all-time high, and Sudan recently declared an economic state of emergency after the pound continued to fall rapidly. The national GDP has shrunk sharply due to diminishing growth in the investment, services, and agriculture industries. Moreover, there are massive shortage in the fuel, food, and other basic necessities. Compounding these challenges, Sudan has been experiencing the unprecedented social and economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, including increased price of basic foods, rising unemployment, and diminishing export. While the challenges facing implementation are real and immense, we nevertheless cannot risk the success of the Sudan transition with hastily concluded or poorly implemented agreement. International support will be critical for the implementation of Sudan's peace agreement, and thus for the success of its peace process and political transition. Given the many challenges that still face Sudan's peace process and political transition, Sudan and its people will need tremendous support from its regional and international partners as it moves forward from this critical point in Sudan's transition. Sudan will need extensive support and partnership from its friends, neighbors, and partners around the world to ensure the effective implementation of peace agreement and success of which is critical to the success of Sudanese transition. The support of international community has been critical to the conclusion of the Juba Peace Agreement and will be even more critical as we move toward implementation. Sudan cannot do it alone. We will need the support for our partners to make durable peace and comprehensive, inclusive, and democratic transformation a reality. Peace, security, stability, and prosperity in Sudan are important nationally, regionally, and internationally, and thus require national, regional, and international support. We now have a critical opportunity to build a new Sudan that is based on a culture of peace and that promotes and protects the interests of the many, not the few. Achieving peace has not been easy, and sustaining a durable peace that addresses both the root causes and the consequences of Sudan's conflict will still require a lot of work and the inclusive participation of all Sudanese and assistance of our international partners. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ustaz Al-Taishi, for that presentation. May I now turn to Mr. Yasir Arman to be the next speaker. Yes, would you like to unmute yourself first? I think we still need you to unmute. Ah, that's better.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. The implementations of Juba Peace Agreement and the reform of the state and the transitional period and the question of the inclusivity. Allow me first to express my warm greeting to all of you and each one of you who are attending this session this afternoon in Sudan time. And let me express my gratitude and appreciation for your kind invitation and your continuous concern and support for the democracy and peace in Sudan. And let me assure you that they had never been a great opportunity to achieve both democracy and peace other than the one at hand nowadays in Sudan. The December revolutions is the one behind Juba Agreement. Without it, it is difficult to envisage the current situation. And for the first time in the history of the transitional period leading to democracy, that peace and democracy are possible to be obtained together as one package. And in our experience in Sudan, it has been demonstrated very clearly that there is no peace without democracy, and there is no democracy without peace. Juba Peace Agreement represents one of the rare historical opportunities for Sudan. The agreement, too, is a framework to reform the transitional period itself and the state institution in Sudan by addressing the root causes of the war and marginalization. The discourse of the transitional period has been shaped by the urban discourse and the civic rights rather than the natural rights and the rural areas concerned. Both are equally important and complement each other, and you cannot do without either. And therefore, issues of equal citizenship without discrimination, land, transitional justice, IDPs and refugees, security sector reform, they were equally taken their rightful place in the discourse of the transitional period, and its priorities in the course of implementations. Without a serious reform of the military and the security sector, it is difficult to envisage gearing the transitional period towards building the civilian state and democratic transformation that will lead to a free and fair election. And it is only the Juba Peace Agreement that had provided a blueprint for the security sector reform with clear mechanism, phases, and timeline. The implementation of Juba Peace Agreement represents a new opportunity for Sudan to engage into a serious nation-building process, and it is the only available game in town. The implementation of Juba Peace Agreement is the game changer for the whole political paradigm and to attract those who do not sign the peace agreement. And as the peace agreement has addressed the major issues in the war-affected areas, and it is more or less comprehensive in terms of issues and the substantial concern of the war-affected areas and the marginalized group. The shortcoming of Juba Peace Agreement are that there are two important organizations do not sign the agreement. Nevertheless, the Juba Peace Agreement has provided a window of opportunity for them, and it is implementation, therefore, is a key factor in attracting and encouraging these organizations. Increasing the inclusivity is a multi-dimensional subject. On the top of it, it is that the agreement should be owned by the Sudanese people themselves. In the SRF advance team visit to Western Darfur and Northern Sudan, Western Kordofan, Blue Nile, and Eastern Darfur as well, and at the massive receptions of the leaders of the organization signatories to the Juba Peace Agreement in Khartoum on the afternoon of 15 of November 2020, all this event has demonstrated the magnitude of the warm welcome and the appreciation of the peace agreement. This will increase as we put on the ground the different mechanisms that are intended to increase people participation and the action that are intended to bring millions of IDPs and refugees into the political process. This is notwithstanding the effort to bring the non-signatories to the peace agreement on board. May be worth mentioning that Ustaz Abdul Wahid Mohammed Noor has started his process of engagement in the peace process for the first time in the region. Providing political and material support and funding of the donors and partners to the Juba Peace Agreement is critical for the peace building in Sudan. Otherwise, we will encourage the collapse of the peace process as a whole, and we will make it harder for those who have signed the agreement and those who do not sign the agreement. And we will only encourage wars. The Juba Peace Agreement is behind time, and up to now, we have not developed a comprehensive approach and a clear list of priorities. Lastly, the involvement of the grantor and the witnesses in the region and in the international community, especially in the assessment and evaluation mechanism of the implementation of Juba Peace Agreement, plus funding it is of a great importance. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ustaz Yasir Arman. Now, may I give the floor to Ms. Huda Shafiq?
Thank you so much for having me. I believe that exclusion and marginalization are at the top of the issues that we need to address in this moment of transition. Economic exclusion and control of resources, ethnic, geographical, social, and gender-based exclusion. All of these multiple layers of exclusion, inequalities, mismanagement had led to the devastating state we find ourselves in. While the uprising was a cry of salvation, we continue to face the same demons we protested against, not in the shape of the political regime, but the same deeds and ideals. Juba Peace Agreements indeed affected the political space significantly, as it enhanced the diversity and inclusion within the forces of the revolution. Yet, it continues to build on other layers of historical marginalization of women and youth in the country, despite the very efforts by women and youth towards inclusion and social and political transformation. Once the formal processes of negotiation started, women and youth both were marginalized and sidelined during the constitutional document negotiations and the Juba peace talks. This marginalization was very obvious in the composition of the different delegations and committees and the lack of clear strategy to ensure inclusivity and effective participation of women and youth. Marginalized groups had to continuously mobilize outside the new power structures to demand inclusion, as these formal structures and processes were not designed to guarantee inclusivity or to respond to their diverse needs and aspirations, which was clear throughout the first year of the transitional government, that politics are led by male-dominated institutions and a patriarchal mentality. The community's participation throughout Juba peace process was limited to a few number of regional consultations in response to civil society demand for inclusive process. There were limited existence of women in the official track, yet very effective, as they pushed to include several gender provisions mainstreamed in the agreements, working in coordination with the women groups whom were able to participate as part of track 2, with the absence of any organized participation of youth in the peace and security processes. Making sure that women are included in political processes in the new Sudan has turned out to be an uphill struggle, but women's rights activists are working tirelessly to challenge the patriarchal mentality. Both the constitutional document and Juba peace agreements include some engendered, or many, I would say, engendered provisions, in addition to the 1325 National Action Plan, of course. Although they're way below our demands, but the real concern for us remains to be the lack of political will to implement inclusive processes and advance women and youth effective participation, which is very obvious in the unjustified delay in establishing the Peace Commission and Women and Gender Equality Commission. The peace process was was very heavy on the power sharing module and light in discussing the root causes of the conflict in the community's level and the issues of peaceful coexistence. The process lacked a clear strategy to ensure effective participation of peace stakeholders. Having the process outside of the country had made it very expensive to especially women and youth to be able to mobilize and deliver their voices. The absence of a formal accountability framework for women, peace, and security, and the lack of sustainable channels to access information. Inclusivity and effective participation are key elements for the success of transitional period and to ensure sustainable peace. The sense of ownership that people get from effectively being participating is key to nations building. Otherwise, it's such a waste of human capital and diverse experiences and use of diverse experiences. The lack of organized platforms to avail sustainable communication and joint planning is creating frustration among the people. Inclusivity is very instrumental for sustainable peace, as it ensures the inclusivity of the issues and solutions. For example, the security arrangement negotiations focused on the process more and was very light on the human security, especially women's protection. It was actually proved by research that inclusive peace process, and especially the one that are led by women, does last longer. The issue with the currently used representation module does only give the space for privileged groups, while other unprivileged women and youth remain marginalized and their issues are barely recognized. There are many steps to be taken for the way forward for more inclusive processes, and some of them are just the need to have a genuine conversation about inclusion is very needed for the transition to succeed. The government and peace parties should commit to the 50% quota, implementation of the 50% quota for women participation in actions. The urgent need to finalize the establishment of the governance structure, the legislative council, the local level councils, independent commissions, and so on. The role of UNITAMs and other UN agencies and member states remains for them to remain really mindful and committed to their international and regional commitments when it comes to women's rights and women's peace and security. For UNITAMs especially, is to integrate gender consideration as a cross-cutting issue throughout their mandate and assist the government of Sudan in ensuring the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women at all levels of peace and political processes and in all social and economic aspects of life. There is a need for community monitoring and evaluation committees to ensure the implementation of the peace agreements and also to follow up on that. To establish a civil society coordination body to organize the collaboration between the different active bodies and communicate with the Peace Commission in the agreement's implementation. I would just like to conclude in a personal note. I really questioned and was hesitant whether my participation today and highlighting this topic before this panel is helpful in this cause. The questions is no longer a matter of whether officials would listen, but rather is there a political will and genuine commitment towards women participation? I mean, aside from the tokenism and the statements that are followed with no actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Huda Shafiq, for that presentation. And now perhaps we could turn to our last speaker of the panelists, Professor Juba. Professor Juba, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the chance, and I will just briefly run over 4 points. The first one, I'm just trying to put the Sudan-Juba Peace Agreement in a wider context. And secondly, try to understand or unpack some concepts which are at the backbone of the agreement, comprehensive, inclusive, and durable. And then I will just outline some of the key aspects that are very fundamental of the implementation of the agreement. And finally, I will just give a very, very short concluding remark as to the how to secure successful transitional period, including the peaceful process. My first point actually starts with an argument that no doubt that the signing of Juba Peace Agreement and the arrival of the leader of the SRF to Khartoum last November represent an important step towards the realization of comprehensive, inclusive, and durable peace, not only to the conflict regions, but also in laying the foundation for political stability, democratic transition, and economic reform nationwide. Inclusive peace, one level of inclusive, the concept of the inclusive peace means that inclusion of all currently active or even inactive actors to the war and conflicts dynamics in Sudan. This is yet, now this particular part of inclusivity or this meaning of inclusivity at this stage is yet to be achieved because we are at this moment, Sudan is actually at the stage of making peace, but at the same time, building peace. What I mean by that, because we have not finalized peacemaking, since there are two major groups who have not signed, as they were mentioned by the previous two speakers. Now, the important point here is that until that happens, until the comprehensive or inclusivity means taking on board all those actors, until that happens, it is so important to emphasize here that the implementation of Juba Peace Agreement has to be effectively and genuinely actualized. The there is no trade-off between moving from peacemaking to peace building stage with Sudan Revolutionary Front on one side and continuing peace negotiation, that is peacemaking, with the other two groups who have not signed. In fact, they are complementary to each other. In fact, they complement each other, not only towards achieving comprehensive, inclusive, and lasting peace, but also towards securing smooth and successful transition for Sudan. And that takes me to the second point, that is to try to comprehend or unpack these two or three concepts of comprehensive, inclusivity, and durability of peace agreement. It is important to conceive and comprehend the fact that in Sudan, there was no one war, but there was a set of wars and conflict in different peripheral regions. Although Sudan, different wars and violence, conflict share several commonalities related to historical socioeconomic marginalization, political exclusion of the periphery by the center, but they did not start at one point or one place or with similar triggering causes. This is very important. In other words, Sudan wars and conflicts were not a point or a single event, but a set of events and processes which occur in different regions at different time with different triggering factors. Therefore, the desired peace agreement must be comprehensive in scope, in space, and in issues. It should be inclusive in involving not only the inclusion of all parties to different conflict and war, but also allow for participation and engagement of stakeholders who are directly affected by war, as well as increasing the level of ownership at the grassroots level, while reaping peace dividends by the affected segment, including the war-affected regions and the social different categories, including women, youth, and the disabled, and the IDPs, and the rest of the different social groups. Juba Peace Agreement must be understood within this complicated context. It's not, as I mentioned, it's not an event, but an important phase with wider set of events and process aiming at achieving and subsequently successful transition followed by a stable transition democratic system. Comprehensive peace must address not only all direct root causes of war and violent conflict, but it must also address the very foundation of the institutional and structural violence, deeply rooted and embedded in the nature of the Sudan political governance, economic structure, and socio-cultural setting. Moreover, it must address the political, economic, and social impact. We are not only aiming at addressing the root causes, but also the impact and consequences and replication of war and conflict, which were created at a later stage of the conflict itself. Issues mentioned already, like refugees, IDPs, livelihood, land restitution, injustice, social disruption, victimhood, human insecurity, and many more are actually the result of the war, but not root causes of the war. Juba Peace Agreement is comprehensive, in my view, in scope, for it addresses the fundamental issues of Sudan crisis in Darfur, the two area and other marginal region, although it is doing this through a number of regional and national protocols. The agreement established for enabling institutional framework, which are likely to ensure effective management of diversity of the Sudanese people and equal citizenship. My third point is that what are the key aspects in the agreement that can actually be the basis for effective implementation. I will actually just give a list. One of them is that, yes, Juba Peace Agreement addresses root causes of the conflict, and I will just mention some of them. For example, it actually fairly addresses and identifies and diagnoses the question of subnational identity and its link to national identity. The question of national identity, it's about the question of including the subnational identity in the constitution of the national identity. And this is one of the root causes. Secondly, it guaranteed a better diversity management by ensuring religious freedom and the separation of state and religion, or religion and politics. And towards that, it established the National Commission for Religious Freedom to protect the rights of Christian and other minorities. 3, economic marginalization was addressed effectively in this agreement through a number of mechanisms, including positive discrimination in development and in civil service and in higher education and training and capacity in favor of the youth of the young population of the war-affected region and also the disadvantaged group. The federal system has already given a chance for a better distribution of the natural resources. This is very important, especially when we recall that most of the war-affected area, Darfur, the 2 areas, are the most rich regions of the Sudan in terms of natural endowment. The agreement looked fairly to address the impact and replication and consequences of the conflict, and it has been already mentioned by previous speaker when he listed the issues which are supposed to be addressed as a result of the impact of the war. I won't go to that. The agreement provides significant devolution of power and resources to the region, including the autonomy of the 2 areas and restoration of the single Darfur region. The agreement provides a fair process for transitional justice, and it brings finally it brings the marginalized forces to the center of the political calculus. And the arrival of the leaders of the Sudan Revolutionary Front to Khartoum and their engagement now in order to be integrated into the institution, the central institution, speak to itself. One of the key elements to achieving inclusive and sustainable peace is to ensure popular ownership and finding ways to engage civil society, stakeholder, marginalized community, including nomads, farmers, in dialogue and reconciliation and social reconciliation. I think the agreement provides a good framework for achieving that. Finally, the key test and challenge for the implementation of this peace agreement depend on the following: whether Sudan can finally whether Sudan is capable and the signatory to the agreement and the government are able to actually unite and deliver the dividend of peace for the victim of Sudan conflicts and embrace inclusion throughout their practices throughout the transitional period. 2, whether the remaining armed movements are ready to start serious negotiation and finalize it with a comprehensive, another comprehensive peace agreement. 3rd, whether partners of peace and transitional period will exercise leadership and honor their political commitment and will to peace agreement and its implementation. 4, whether the leader of our movement, who are mostly from the peripheral areas, will continue making their commitment to the political agenda of those regions and remain focused on those regions throughout the transitional period. And whether the youth and the who were actually the initiator of the change will remain united and focus on attaining their motto, peace, freedom, peace, and equality, and continue to be transformative agent. Finally, whether Sudan will receive the support and attention it deserves from the international community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Juba. So that concludes the initial presentations by our four speakers. And we will now move to the question and answer session. If I may just remind you that if you would like to ask a question, please could you, if possible, use the raised hand function. If you are then selected to speak, you will be unmuted so that you can ask your question. And if you could please just start by introducing yourself by giving your name and affiliation. You can also submit written questions through the Q&A box, though we would prefer you to use the raised hand function if possible. So I will start by asking questions perhaps in groups of 3 or 4. We have a raised hand from Amina Abdul Malik. Could perhaps we start there? Okay, I'm not sure whether that's going to that's going to work. So perhaps I could move on to 1 or 2 of the other raised hands. Let us ask Ahmed Al-Faki to ask his question. Okay, well, what I suggest is while we're trying to sort out the...
Let me unmute myself. I think you hear me now, correct?
Excellent,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, okay. My name is Ahmed El-Faki, and I'm based in London. I'm base management consultant, working here for about 30 years. And thank you to all the speakers. Mr. Al-Taishi, you mentioned the challenges for the transition period. And you mentioned COVID, you mentioned the deterioration of the Sudanese pounds. We're aware of all these challenges. But one challenge is really important, and I think I would love to hear your opinion about it, is the performance of the transitional government. This performance, I think, in my opinion, is the biggest challenge for any democracy. It doesn't make democracy an attractive for the Sudanese people. To be specific, is the lack of transparency. It's scary, lack of transparency, and also completely disconnected from the Sudanese people. And to make my point even clearer, if you take, for example, the opportunities the Prime Minister of Sudan spoke to the Sudanese people, you can count them on your fingers. And that's not good. I mean, we need help of the international community. We need peace. We need to broaden the scope of the government. But unless we are transparent and unless we are willing to inspect what we're doing and to adapt it all the time, we are not going to succeed. I really want to hear your opinion on that.
Thank you. Before inviting Ustaz Al-Taishi to respond to that, we will have 1 or 2 other questions. May I please ask questioners to just ask brief questions in order to we can maximize the number of people who are will have the opportunity to raise questions. We have Peter Maszynski. Could could we unmute Peter, please?
Oh, good afternoon, good evening. Can you hear me now?
You can.
Okay, thank you, Dame Rosalind. I'm Peter Moshinsky. I've been watching war and peace in Sudan and South Sudan since the early 80s, when I saw things begin to fall apart when Mary tore up the Addis Ababa agreement. And I'm just wondering, I mean, given we talk about the need for comprehensiveness, I mean, we saw the last nationwide peace agreements, the so-called comprehensive peace agreement, fall apart. And I'm just wondering, given the delicate and complicated nature of what's happening, is it a good idea for the peace in South Sudan to be governed by the Khartoum peace agreement and the peace in Sudan to be governed by the Juba Peace Agreement, given how precarious both sets of governments are right now? And is there any international backing that could help solidify things?
Okay, thank you. Well, perhaps I could put that question to Mr. Yasser Arman, but before answering, I've got now 3 written questions which I will also feed in, and then we will turn to the panelists to respond. The first one is from Azza Dirar, which I think is probably also for Mr. Arman, which is, has the issue of secularism been explicitly addressed in the Juba Peace Agreement? Then there is a question from Margareta Watabaji. Does the current situation in Ethiopia affect the peace agreement in any way? I wonder if maybe Professor Juma could tackle that one. And then there's a question on security sector reform. What does the Juba Peace Agreement say about security sector reform, including regarding command and control of the rapid support forces and the Sudanese armed forces and the joining of the armed movement forces? Perhaps that could go to either Yasser Arman or to Ustaz Al-Taishi. So Ustaz Al-Taishi, could we start with you then on the question about the performance of the transitional government?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. I would like to thank all those sisters and brothers given these very important questions, if I may, to go for Mr. Ahmed Al-Faki's questions. I listed many challenges that is absolutely facing the implementation for this peace agreement. I focus on the financial challenges, which I describe the current situation in Sudan, which is more clear for all the people following the situation in Sudan. But personally, I do agree with Ahmed Al-Faki. There is a lack of communication between the officials and the public in Sudan. And I don't need to give any reason about that, but I do think one of the weakness area for the current government is to make substantial and communication and encouraging the public to engage in a formal and informal discussion about the peace and the transitions issues. So I do agree with that, and I think that is one of the main issues for this government to need to be addressed very well and to engage with the Sudanese, especially the Sudanese are living in the marginalizing area. I do agree with that, and I think that is one of the challenges facing the government. However, this is, and I mean, is the government could cope with these problems, lack of communication and lack of encouragement. The government could solve it, but the real challenges is absolutely facing the implementation for this peace agreement is the financial issues. You know the record of the agreement that we had before, and I listed thousands of that agreement. If we look to that, you can find the financial challenges, one of the major reasons why the previous agreements not being implemented. And this is, unfortunately, facing the current peace agreement. However, this peace agreement is durable and address all the root causes and the consequences of the conflict, but we can't implement peace agreement without fund and support. And that's why I say we need to work very close with our partners, whether in the regional or international, to make sure this peace agreement fully supported with the international communities and our partners. I too understand that the Friends of Sudan last 2 months is just calling for the supporting the peace agreement. However, we haven't got anything right now, but I think that is the will. We need to work very close with that will and to get the support this peace agreement needed. So I think, Ahmed, you appointed a very valid point, and I think the government need to understand that without engagement with the Sudanese people, there will be a lack of trust, there will be a lack of support that the government really needed from the Sudanese people. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Perhaps now I could ask Ustaz Yasir Arman to address the question from Azadira about whether the issue of secularism has been addressed in the Juba Peace Agreement. Perhaps also on the question of what the Juba Peace Agreement says about security sector reform, and whether it's a good idea for Sudan and South Sudan to be so closely involved in each other's peace processes. Thank you.
I don't know whether you are hearing me.
Yes, we are.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Rosalind, and thanks to my friend Peter Mizeritsky on his important question about the involvement of each country on each other affairs when it comes to bringing peace, and whether the international community, their involvement will solidify and would add value and add more, making it more solid in terms of the prospect of implementing this peace agreement. First of all, and I would like to say that one of the added value of Juba Peace Agreement and the Khartoum Peace Agreement is that there is an African solutions to African problems. And there is a model that is given to the whole of the continent in terms of that countries with similar problems who share space, who share strategic geographical locations, they should help each other. And I remember very well that President Idris Deby, in his remark during the signing ceremony in Juba, he said that he is very happy and would comment and would say thousand of bravo to President Salva Kiir and to Burhan, to Hamdok, to all those who are involved. And he said the West African, they should take this model and they should not look outside the continent to improve their situation in terms of peace and looking for solutions. And therefore, I believe despite the problems and despite there are, I want to be very blunt and clear, there are some guys who are saying that, look, in Juba and in Khartoum, both countries are having issues about democracy, human rights, and all this. But truly speaking, democracy starts by ending violence. There is no democracy that can prevail during the violence. Therefore, those who are looking for democratizations of South Sudan or Sudan, they should welcome, in the first place from the international community, they should welcome ending violence and having peace agreement. And I would like also to say, frankly, that the international community, they were not at the beginning encouraged by having Juba at the venue. And there was a number of issues that has been raised. And there was a very little faith whether Cuba will be able to help in the peace in Sudan or not. But the tangible result that we had got an agreement in Cuba, and not only that, the two other organizations are now ready to engage with the same government. We share a history. We have been one state for 100 years. So I believe the international community should take the two agreements seriously, and they should take them together, and they should help both countries together to implement those peace agreements, because they will add into the stability of the region and to the stability of the two countries, especially given the situation in Libya, Ethiopia, and other situations in the region. And therefore, I believe that we have a new opportunity, not only of implementing peace, but to start a new strategic relations between the two Sudans, and therefore within our region, and that will help the international stability as well. Coming to the question, I think I didn't get the name clearly, Azad or Asad, about the security arrangement. It is a very important question too. The security arrangement and whether the rapid deployment forces at Da'am al-Sarir are included or not. I have heard this question many times. This question we have raised during our negotiations. The rapid deployment force, technically they are part of the regular armed forces, and whenever we raise this question, the answer was clear from the government that this force belongs to the government. It is part of the regular forces, and whatever you agree on the security arrangement is going to be applied on all forces. That was the answer from late Minister Jamal when I was personally discussing with him, and later on with all the government delegation from security sector. The importance of the security sector reform and detail, that it is home-driven reform. We are not depending on the outside. I understand the importance of UNIMIT, and I understand the importance of UNITEMS, but the durable solution is for us, the Sudanese, to know how to keep our security and how to build and to reform our security sector. Saying this, also one of the major addition of the peace agreement, that this peace agreement is also focused on the civilian protection, especially in Darfur. As you know, UNIMIT has been given this mandate, and therefore there is a national force that is diverse, and that would reflect the composition of Darfur itself. And likewise, in the two areas, and especially if we could achieve another peace agreement with Comrade Abdulaziz. And therefore, the security reform, it is a long process. But what we have addressed the major aspects with very clear mechanisms within 40 months, where we will start solidly having one Sudanese army that is professional and that with a new military doctrine, and that is all enshrined in the peace agreement, and that reflects the diversity of Sudan. This may take not only 40 months, it may take 10 years, but it needs a political will, it needs a popular support, it needs an institutional support. It is not an easy issue, it is the most difficult area in the whole transition, and there will be no democracy and there will be no civilian state without transforming the security and the military sector. And this is an issue for all of us. I don't know, Rosalind, there is an issue about the secular, whether you want me to tackle it, because it is an important issue, whether the agreement addresses secularism or not. Thank you.
Yes, I think Yassir, if you could just say a word on that, that would be great. And then after, perhaps if you could answer that, and then we'll turn to Professor Juba, perhaps to answer the question on whether the current situation in Ethiopia affects the peace.
Well, regarding secularism, also the whole situation of transforming Sudan after 30 years of fascism, as Professor Juma was saying before, it is a process. It is not something that we are going to shove it, going for shopping in the supermarket, and we'll bring it ready-made for the Sudanese people. It entails a lot of things, especially secularism. It entails an internal process that has a lot to do of building the civilian state, educations, and building a new paradigm shift in all the aspects of the institution and of the government, and it will take time. But this issue, to start with it and to put the ingredients and the perfect element for this process, the answer is yes in this agreement, because this agreement said clearly that the state should have an equal distance from all religions, and that there should be a clear separations between the state institution and the religious institutions for the two areas where there is the most clear multi-religious societies in Sudan after the secession of South Sudan. They have been given an autonomy. They have been given the right for legislations on the basis of the Constitution of 1973, amended 1974, which is a secular constitution. This issue also has another chance to develop it during the Constitutional Conference and during the continuous rebuilding of a civilian state. Nevertheless, Comrade Abdulaziz and his group, they have the right to raise it again and again, and to make sure and to bring their addition, or whatever that addition that is practical and that is can be accepted and can be implemented during the interim period. We will support that definitely. For us, we are a secular organizations, but we believe that secularism in its full mandate it is a prerequisite to build a new Sudan, but not to achieve a peace agreement. Peace agreement, it needs compromises. I'm not saying we should omit or leave this question. We didn't left it in our agreement. We addressed it, but we are looking at it as a process. We should put the ingredients and the elements that are necessary today, and we should continue it for tomorrow. But we will welcome definitely any addition from the other part of the SPLM North, and that will add value to us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Professor Juma, could I turn to you now on the Ethiopian issue?
Yes, thank you. I think this should be the easiest question, I believe, because it's not so difficult to see the impact of the recent emerging Ethiopian conflict on the Sudan, and one direct impact is an economic one. You know that already the country is really enduring a very difficult economic situation, even at the community level. And so definitely the influx of refugees in thousands into the eastern region add an economic pressure on not only on the local communities, but even on the regional government and national government as well, because it involves a lot of expenditures. It's not only related to relief and all this, but it involves even security, raising the expenditure on security, on social services, and so forth. So directly, it has a negative impact on that. The second dimension is that it's also involve social disruption, because the movement of the refugees crossing the border, in that way, it also entails some degree of social disruption in a region which is already has some sort of social and political turmoil. We know that the eastern region, the greater eastern region, has been undergoing a series of insecurity and social disruption. So the influx of refugees into that region will actually complicate this already very difficult situation socially. In terms of the political dimension, I think up to this moment, and we hope that the conflict will not actually prolong itself, because otherwise it will actually create the dynamics that may have a serious political dimension vis-a-vis the regional relation, not only between the two countries, but even beyond the Horn of African different type of region, because the question is not only the question of the borders, but it's a question of security and peace in the entire region. So the impact is direct and visible.
Thank you very, very much. So we'll now take another round of questions. I see a question from Yedre Serep, and I do apologize if I've mispronounced your name, but you have the floor.
Thank you. Actually, you pronounced it quite correctly. I'm Jędrzej Czerep from the Polish Institute of International Affairs. I'm an Africa analyst at this institute. My question goes to Professor Juma Kondakome. You've mentioned changes in mentality, in political culture, in ways of doing things as part of the process of making Juba Agreement a success. This is specifically interesting for me, as this is a subject of my research. I'm actually working on a book on the political culture in Sudan. If you were to come up with a few examples of the most important aspects of the political game that really thoroughly changed, where new ways of doing things really arrived, and those which are the most difficult to change. Madam Huda Shafiq mentioned some important areas where she sees the system still entrenched in the old ways. We've seen recent arrest of groups of artists, including Hajuj Kuka as another example, where the judiciary, on how the judiciary operate. So I'm thinking specifically about challenges to bring new doctrine and the new mentality to the security sector. How does arrival of the former armed groups affect this process?
Thank you very much indeed. We have also some questions, written questions online. One is from Milena Stereo, asking how important are transitional justice and accountability as pathways towards successful long-term implementation of peace. I don't know whether perhaps Ms. Huda could address that one. We have a question from Jihad Mashamoon asking, why does the Juba Peace Agreement have to be integrated into the constitutional document? And then we have a question from Patricia Parker asking whether the panelists could give their analysis of the recently established Transitional Partners Council. So I don't know who would like to start with the question about what changes have been observed in the political culture. Huda, I don't know whether you might like to start on that, and possibly also, if you wish, touch on the question about transitional justice and accountability. I think Huda, I think, may have dropped off for the moment. So perhaps I could, in that case, just ask the panelists who are still with us if they would like to comment on the issue, the question concerning the Transitional Partners Council. Ustaz Al-Taishi, I don't know if we could start with you, perhaps.
All right, thank you so much. I couldn't pick the right name that's raising these issues. I'm not good anyhow for keeping names. And the issues ongoing, the discussion is going on about the partner councils. First, I would like to say this partner council is not part of the peace agreement. And however, the peace agreement brought a new partnership to the existing partnerships are going between the army and the FFC. So in my view, to establish a partnership council, from my experience for the last 1 year in the transition government, is a good idea. Because for political issues, we need to keep the discussion going on, because the last year we experienced many divisions about many issues that's related to the transition issues, and that will create, and I think in somehow create a hostile environment among the partners. So to go for establish a partner council, that is a good idea. However, we need to make sure this partner council is not overall the roles of the sovereign council or the cabinet ministers or the transitional legislative council. We need to focus on the political differences among the partners, and that need to be one of the major role of this conference. Otherwise, I think we'll create even more division among the partners, which we don't need it, because we need to make a good partnership during this transition government, and we need to make sure that this peace agreement implemented in a very good environment, and we need to make sure that all the issues that needed to be implemented during the transition government is implemented in a good relationship between the partnership. So just to make clear, the partnership council, it is not a part of the peace agreement, but it's going to allocate one of the new partners that's brought by the peace agreement. the SRF and the other parties signed for this peace agreement. So we need to end up with the council that can make the partnerships during the peace agreement working in a good environment and can fix the differences that we may expect it during the transition time.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether either of our other panelists would like to comment briefly on that. I'm afraid we seem to have lost Ms. Huda Shafiq for technical reasons, but Professor Juba, I don't know whether, would you like to add anything to the remarks that Ustaz Al-Taishi has made on this issue?
Yes, I just wanted to, because there was a question which was directed to me and regarding the change in mentality and state of mind. And I was not sure whether I get it right, but I see that this time the peace process actually was associated with a number of change in the state of mind and mentality. And I would start right from the revolution. The revolution actually set a kind of a new state of mind when the youth crossed all the borders, political border, ethnic border, religious border, and united in order to overthrow the regime. That was already a kind of new kind of setting that was driving the revolution. And even the revolution itself, unlike the other revolution in the Sudan history, the participation of the periphery and rural areas and regions was extremely high. And in fact, I am always advocating the fact that the triggering of the revolution actually started from Damascene. Although it was a very low profile, but that is a fact. And later on, it actually escalated in Atbar and then come to the Khartoum. And this is a new kind of change and kind of a shift in the dynamics of Sudanese politics. And thirdly, the pressure for peace was not from from external, but it was from within. After the revolution, the demand of the masses of the revolutions were actually demanding that the peace should have a top priority, it should be a top priority agenda. Unlike the previous peace agreement, when the international community will actually exercise pressure from the top down. This time, the pressure was from within, and it was from bottom up. And I think these are all examples of that. With regard to the integration of the Juba Peace Agreement into the Constitution, I don't think that is the problem. The problem is about the function of the body. I think that is the main point. The Prime Minister, when he voiced out his 4 points, they were not related to the very establishment of the Partners Council, but it was rather about the function, because the Partner Council seemed to be politically agreed generally, but people, different actors and different stakeholders were expecting that they should agree precisely on the function and also the bylaws which is going to regulate their function. And it's a kind of a political club, if I may say, which is supposed to, like, as it was said, to hammer out some of the dispute and some of the politics before going into the institutions in that respect. So in that sense, I think the point of contention here is not about the body itself, it's about the function of the body, rather.
Thank you very much indeed. Before we conclude, we've just got one more questioner who has put his hand up, Mr. Dixon Jr. I wonder if he could be given an opportunity to speak. No, that seems to be taking a bit of time. Well, in the meantime, we still have a question about how important is transitional justice and accountability. How important are they as pathways towards sustainable peace? Ustaz Al-Taishi, I don't know whether you would like to comment on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. I couldn't see there is any comprehensive and durable peace agreement without addressing the transition justice issue, because this is one of the most affected area during the long war in Sudan. And secondly, I think in the last 2 decades, the civil wars in Sudan, specifically in Darfur and 2 areas, went so bad in terms of crossing the rule of the law and genocide that the central government has made against the civilian, whether in Darfur or in 2 areas. And yes, in Juba Peace Agreement, we addressed this transitional justice in 2 levels, whether in the national level and in a regional level. In Darfur itself, we went for the role of the ICC and the role of the special Darfur court, and also for the traditional justice role in Darfur. And also, we addressed that in the 2 areas. Now, one of the issues that need to be funded and fully supported is, whether to be technically or financially, is the transitional justice, because there is the peace agreement created many mechanisms in terms of to implement the transitional justice, and that itself need to be supported in terms of to fully implement it and get the transition justice right. I do believe if you walk through the transition justice in Darfur track, we addressed this in very details, and I could understand why we went for that very details, because this is very complicated issues being discussed and debated, whether nationally or internationally. Many international organizations and aspects being involved about this transition justice issues. So I think the Juba Peace Agreement fully addresses the transition justice, and the challenges is right now waiting for the facing the transition justice is to support the mechanism that's responsible to implement what we have agreed in the Juba Peace Agreement. And this is the issue that I think you have raised. And what the other, if you may just remind me.
No, I think that was the main question. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
I think now I'll just I will just now go round, and perhaps everyone can give everyone an opportunity to make any final concluding remarks or comments on any of the outstanding questions. There's a couple that have just come in, which perhaps you can, if you wish to, you can address as we wrap up. Well, there was a rather specific question from Eddie Thomas, who asks, who says that the Juba Peace Agreement allows for the governments of Darfur and the 2 areas to borrow money from international creditors. How might these loans support peace in these areas, and what risks might this policy run? The other question more generally is, how will it be possible to implement the Juba Peace Agreement given the economic crisis in Sudan? I think some speakers touched on that in their original remarks. But could I give each of our panelists an opportunity to either address those questions and or make any final comments that they would like to do? Perhaps starting Professor Juma with you, if I may.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you so much. I think I will just say a few words. with regard to the repeating question of the economic crisis and economic challenge, I would rather say that the peace agreement is an economic burden, but it's also an economic opportunity. Because in terms of being an economic burden, the implementation need a lot of money in order to implement the different activities and interventions enshrined in the peace agreement. There is no question about that. Therefore, in that term, it is an economic burden, but you have to look to the other side of the coin and see that by the fact that you sign the agreement and you silence the gangs and you stop the violence and you provide the peaceful environment for the people, especially the war affected area, to return home, this alone is an economic opportunities. I quickly mentioned that one of the dilemma of the Sudan is that the most rich region of the Sudan are the most disrupted region by the war. And by stopping the war, you are actually allowing the Sudan economic resources, natural resources, to start and enter into the economic circle and economic equation of the country. Even if you don't have an international heavy investment, the livelihood of the people will start to actually integrate into an economic situation, and this alone can improve. I agree with an argument that economic challenges is one of the main point that face the peace agreement, but I still agree that the Sudan, if Sudan look inward first and tap on the available resources and stimulate the rural livelihood in order to start having a kind of satisfaction, I think we can have a great contribution to actually minimize the challenge of economic crisis. And I believe that the economic crisis can be actually managed more than other factors which are challenging to the conflict, including the political will, including the unity of the different forces, and including other external factors which are actually representing the challenge to the peace agreement. So I tend to believe that the economic crisis is a fact, but it is something which we can manage if we have a better trust in our own local capacities and our natural resources and economic resources, which can be tapped in a better way if we just stop the war. So the peace itself is an economic burden, but it is also equally, it is a very fundamental economic opportunity for that matter.
Thank you very much. Ustaz Al-Taishi, I don't know if you could comment on this question about the benefits and risks of allowing the governments of Darfur and the two areas to borrow money from international creditors, and also make any further concluding remarks that you might wish to make.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much. I am very impressed with the argument that Professor Jim'a just has made about the benefit that the Sudan could achieve through stopping the war and give the peace a chance. And because it's a funny thing, the area that's experienced the war during the last 4 decades is the most rich and the most productive areas in Sudan. And whether to be in resources, agriculture, or even human beings. But I need to just put some clarity about the issue of the rights being given to the Darfur and two area, and also other region as well. If you went to the national protocols addressed this right not only for Darfur but also for other state as well. But we said that's very clear. To give a right to the Darfur or other states to borrowing on an international institutions, thus need to be within the national financial policy, whether to be from the central bank or the central government. So it is a major state that's to give these states right to borrow, but that need to be within the national policies, economic national policies, whether from the central bank or the national economic policy in Sudan as general. So, but also we need to understand this given to this state in a specific area. I mean, to fill like the deficit gap that's needed to support the peace element on Darfur or in two areas, also in eastern Sudan. So I just need to say this it may fill the gap and it may help to implement the peace in Darfur track and in two areas track as well.
Thank you very much. I think that Ms. Huda Shafiq might have come back online. Huda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now very well.
Good. I'm going to ask. We're very sorry we lost you for a certain period of time, but delighted that you're back. I'm going to ask Mr. Yasser Arman to make any concluding remarks that he may have, but perhaps I can then give you the final word, and if you could maybe just say something in conclusion about what you think needs to be done to strengthen the participation of women in implementing the Juba Peace Agreement and in enacting meaningful changes. So if I could give you a minute to think about that, and perhaps we can now turn to Mr. Yasser Arman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it looks as
yeah. Well, thank you, Madam Rosalind and Ahmed Suleiman, for this opportunity. I would like to conclude on the following. First of all, I don't want to ignore the issue of women. It is an important issue, and I believe that the Juba Peace Agreement have uplifted the issues of women, especially with the armed movement. Unlike any peace negotiations before the armed movement, their delegation has witnessed a substantial presence of women from the marginalized areas for the first time, and many of them, they contributed and they have strong voices. It is true that is not what women are aspiring for, but it is important to have their presence in that way. They deserve more. Again, the issue of women, especially their participation in decision making and taking, it has been explicitly in the agreement. Issues of women are very complicated, with or without the Juba agreement. These revolutions has opened a new beginning for the Sudanese women, because they have been the target of fascism all through the 30 years of Bashir. Coming again to the economic crisis, I believe, on the contrary, I will add my voice to both Professor Gim'a and Ustaz Al-Taishi, that the economic crisis, it is real solution, it is in making peace, not war, and there have never been an economy that has been addressed and reformed through wars. It is only through peace that we can reform the economy in the interest of the marginalized people. The cost of war, it is known, it is much higher than the cost of peace. Take Darfur, for example. The UNAMID alone has cost 18 billion of US dollar, which could have been used to develop, you can imagine what development will take place in Darfur if this 18 billion dollar has been used to develop the rural areas in Darfur. The addressing the issues of the rural areas and taking services, towns to the rural areas, than bringing the rural areas to the cities and to the urban areas, it is a major issue in Africa and in Sudan. And it needs to be addressed, and the only way to address it is to end wars in the rural areas of Sudan. Lastly, I would like to say that regarding the Partnership Council, that the transitional period from the beginning up to now has witnessed failure in creating an efficient partnership between all the actors, including the institutions that are carrying the process of the transitional period. And the Sudanese, they need to learn how to work in partnership. And we have two options: is either to confront each other's, all those actors, all those different institutions, or to learn how to work together and how to build a partnership. And that was the idea of the Partnership Council, that it should be a council, a small council of wise persons, men and women. Those wise persons, they represent the real actor and current in the transitional period, and therefore this political mechanism should resolve the political dispute in a new fashion and outside the box, but it tends to be a crisis itself, which defeat the purpose of this council. Nevertheless, we need to go to the drawing board, and we need to learn those different centers of power during the transitional period, including the streets. The streets are still also playing their role during the transitional period. We need to know how to create this partnership and how to work together. Otherwise, it may be a recipe for the collapse of the Sudanese itself. We need to build a new system. That is the only way, and I believe we are all capable of doing that. We have much experience, and I believe there is much energy, and there is people with the good intentions to make this paradigm shift and to build a new country and a new system. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, Ms. Huda Shafiq, I think the last word is yours, just to, if you would like to say something about what needs to be done to strengthen the participation of women in implementing the Juba Peace Agreement and bringing about meaningful change.
Thank you so much, Rosalinda, and I apologize for disappearing for some time. It's my network and was not stable, and it's for the same reason I'm joining with only voice. So just to respond to this question and conclude, I think we all need to revive the three slogans and principles of our revolution, like freedom, peace, and justice. And what we're really lacking now is justice. And there's no peace without justice and no justice without peace. And that, in terms of women participation, women rights in all of this agreement, implementation, and other marginalized and minorities, marginalized groups and minorities as well. I think one of the key things that the government and the peace parties should be doing right now is the accountability framework when it comes to advancing women's rights. And there are different things that could be done. Some of them are just the endorsement of international and regional treaties on women's rights like CEDAW, Maputo Protocol, the fact that the internal policies and structures need to start to be really responsive and committed and responsible when it comes to advancing women's rights, at least starting by implementing the commitments on the conceptual framework of the peace agreement of peace agreements and the constitutional document. It's very important to also plan the implementation of the National Action Plan 1325 in line with the implementation of the peace agreements. It doesn't make sense just to have isolated and separated processes in such implementation. There is a lot of opportunities. I mean, the coordination between the women across institutions, political parties, civil groups, and unarmed groups is very vibrant, and is really it's very promising. And I think it's not the issue of the women and how effective they are. It is the issue of the institutions, and to what extent these institutions are flexible and ready to be reformed when it comes to their structures and programs and the real interest in advancing women's rights. And I think that is really one of the first solutions I think that the institution should consider and be doing already. Another important aspect of the peace is the security sector reform, which is really key, and it impacts the women's lives and women's security and protection and all of that. We need to start doing this using a feminist approach. It cannot be just focusing on the DDR processes and the mainstreaming of the troops and all of that. It needs to take the feminist approach into consideration. It's really, I just want to say that it's really disappointing, and it's very shameful that we still have to demand these rights after such a revolution, and to demand it in talking to what we consider to be like peers or partners in our struggle. I think it's just, it doesn't go with a great revolution. One of the greatest revolution in the political history of Sudan. And I think we just need to start being genuine and responsive to our commitments onto the slogans and to whatever agreements we make. Thank you so much.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Well, may I take this opportunity now to thank all our speakers for their very important contributions, and also the participants in this webinar for their questions and for their time and attention. Much appreciated. Thank you all very much indeed.